It all started on an afternoon that should have been ordinary: a warm sky, a restless crowd, the sound of voices climbing over one another in the square, and then the kind of moment that sneaks up on you and splits your life into before and after. I remember the line of Riot police moving forward like a wall, their shields gleaming under the sun, and the way one officer raised his baton high, aiming straight at an old man who could barely keep his balance. He looked like he was in his late 70s. His cane had already slipped in the push of bodies, and he was bracing himself for a blow he had no way to stop. I swear I didn't think. I didn't weigh pros and cons. I just felt something burn inside me, an instinct that screamed move, and suddenly I was in front of him, taking the strike across my shoulder. The impact knocked the breath out of me, pain exploding down my back, but I refused to fall. The crowd gasped in one long breath, then silence, then a chant that started small and grew like fire catching dry grass. She's with him, she's with him. And I realized they weren't chanting my name. They didn't even know it. They were chanting the act, the choice, the refusal to let a frail veteran be crushed under the weight of authority. The baton that should have swung again never came down. One officer lowered his weapon, then another, and for the first time that day the police line faltered. I wrapped my arm under the man's, dragged him step by step until we reached the fountain at the edge of the square. Strangers handed me water. Someone returned his cane. Cameras hovered in every direction. I held myself tall even though my shoulders screamed, because I knew every lens was pointed at me, and in moments like that you realize history doesn't wait for permission. The man introduced himself as Walter Reed, a retired Marine who had fought wars long before most of us were born. His voice cracked when he told me I didn't have to do what I did, but I just shook my head. I couldn't stand by, I told him. That was all. Simplicity sometimes carries further than speeches. That night, I thought maybe the noise would die down, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Clips of me stepping into the blow flooded every feed, slowed down, zoomed in, captioned with slogans I didn't choose. Some people called me reckless, some called me a hero. Either way, the story wasn't mine anymore. Across town, in a clubhouse smelling of oil and leather, a man named Jack Maddox, a former Marine sniper turned president of a biker chapter, watched the same footage on a beat-up TV. He let the silence stretch after the clip ended, then said 5 words to the 100 men waiting around him. She's family now. We ride. By dawn, the sound of Harleys rolled like thunder across highways. First dozens, then hundreds, chrome flashing under the morning light. News choppers caught the shot, a river of black and chrome heading for the Capitol. People lined overpasses with signs. Drivers pulled over just to watch the convoy pass. They weren't honking or shouting, they were moving like a single organism, shoulder to shoulder, with one purpose. And by the time they reached the Pentagon, the media had already named it, the silent siege. Inside those walls, generals barked orders, aides scrambled, officials argued about whether to call it intimidation or protest. On live television, anchors whispered that the most secure building in the country was surrounded by bikers who hadn't broken a single law. And yet the silence, the steady rumble of engines, pressed harder than any speech. Hashtags spread silent siege, engines speaking for the first time in years. The Pentagon looked afraid. Meanwhile, I sat in my small apartment staring at the leather vest Jack had pressed into my hands, the emblem stitched across the back unmistakable. I told him I was just a teacher. I had papers to grade, a class waiting for me, but he shook his head. Family doesn't wait until you're ready, he said. The moment chooses you. I didn't put the vest on, not yet, but I felt its weight every second, heavier than the bruise blooming across my shoulder. Then came the press conference where an official called me a criminal. That was the last straw for Jack. He brought me straight to the plaza in front of the Pentagon, cameras flashing, soldiers lined behind barricades with rifles slung. He stood tall, helmet under his arm, and his voice carried across the crowd without a microphone. She shielded one of yours, a veteran who wore your uniform when this country sent him to fight. She took the strike meant for him. And for that you raised batons instead of honor. The bikers roared their engines in unison, so loud it drowned out the anchors trying to narrate, and you could see it in the soldiers' faces, the flinch, the doubt. They pulled us into a conference room thick with medals and stars, men in suits and uniforms who tried to remind us of law and order. Jack set his helmet on the table with a thud and leaned forward. "This isn't about bikes," he said. "This is about family. She stood for one of ours, and now 100 of us stand for her. You think troops can break that bond? You don't know what loyalty looks like." When they argued that loyalty doesn't override law, he shot back. "Neither does cowardice, and yet you let riot police swing at a man who once wore your flag." You could see their faces pale, their pens tremble against paper. Then he added, quieter, like a blade sliding out of a sheath, "And don't think we came empty. We brought records, names, debts you buried. Push us, and the whole country will see what you wanted forgotten." Bluff or not, they believed him, and belief was power enough. By the next sunrise, bikers gathered outside courthouses across the nation, engines idling in silence, crowds drawn by the sound, office workers leaning out of windows with their phones. The chant born in the square, "She's with him," echoed from sidewalks and overpasses. When reporters asked me to speak, I didn't deliver a fiery speech. I just gestured toward Walter, standing beside me with his cane, and said, "Remember him. Remember every veteran who shouldn't have to stand alone." Simple words, soft words, but they landed like stone. News outlets called it the whisper heard around the world. Finally, the Pentagon blinked. They issued statements promising reforms for veteran care, oversight for riot police, investigations into misconduct. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to break the standoff. As the sun dipped, the bikers began shutting down their engines one by one, the rumble fading into silence. The city exhaled. But the moment that will stay with me forever wasn't the press releases or the headlines. It was walking out of the hospital days later with my arm in a sling, Walter at my side, and seeing the street lined with people, the crowd parting as more than 100 engines roared to life in unison. The bikers had formed a corridor, chrome gleaming, leather shining, a living monument stretching from the doors to the horizon. Jack waited at the far end, helmet resting on his bike, and when he inclined his head the engines answered, a thunder so loud it shook my bones. Step by step, Walter and I walked through that corridor, bikers nodding in silence, reporters whispering instead of shouting. When Walter's cane slipped, 2 riders caught his arm before he could fall, and he whispered, "Family. That's what this is." At the end of the line, Jack rose and said, "Some moments don't fade. Today, we write one." He extended his hand, leather against skin, and the engines roared one final time, a sound people miles away said they felt in their chests like a second heartbeat. I never asked for this road, never wanted to be anyone's symbol, but sometimes life doesn't wait for your consent. Sometimes the world hands you a choice that splits everything you thought you knew. I was just a teacher who couldn't bear to watch an old man get beaten, but from that single step forward came a movement, a silence so loud it rattled the Pentagon itself. Now, I don't know if you'd call it courage or recklessness, if you think standing up that way was right or wrong, but I do know this. Sometimes silence is louder than rage, sometimes loyalty is stronger than fear, and sometimes family is bigger than blood. So tell me, what do you think? Was it justice or defiance? Foolish or necessary? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because the debate isn't over and maybe, just maybe, the ending belongs to you.